It had been raining for days. The kind of rain that didn't flood the roads, but soaked everything slowly, like time itself was melting. Elena had stopped checking the forecast. It didn't matter. The sky had one plan, and it was to fall. She lived at the edge of a forgotten village, in a stone house that used to belong to her grandfather. He was gone now. Everyone was gone, actually. The neighbors, the cousins who used to visit during holidays, the boy she almost married, all gone. The house stood quiet, like her life. She cleaned floors in a ceramic studio to pay for groceries, kept her bills low, and rarely left the village unless she needed supplies. She didn't complain. She had grown used to the silence. Sometimes she even liked it. That night, after returning from work, she sat down to her usual dinner: bread, olives, cheese. She lit a small fire and listened to the wind move through the trees beyond her window. The kind of wind that made the branches knock softly on the glass, as if they were trying to remind her that the world was still moving out there. And then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Short, sharp, a cry. Not human, not a dog, not even close to a cat. She froze. It came again. She stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Rain tapped against her face as she stepped out, holding her coat closed with one hand and gripping a flashlight in the other. The air smelled of wet stone and earth. She followed the sound past the broken fence, across the overgrown garden, and toward the olive grove that had been wild for years. The trees there were old, some hollowed by time, others bent like old men with tired spines. As she passed between them, her light flickered against the bark. Rain hit the leaves overhead, dripping like a slow clock. Then she saw it, a small shape, barely moving, lying in a dip between two roots. She stopped. It was a cub, a tiger cub. She didn't believe it at first. Her brain tried to tell her it was something else, a dog with stripes, maybe. But as she stepped closer, she saw the truth. Wet fur, orange and black, a swollen eye, tiny claws dug into the dirt. Its breathing was shallow. She lowered her flashlight and knelt beside it. No collar, no sign of anyone around. It didn't try to run. It barely even looked at her. Elena took off her coat and wrapped it around the cub. It didn't resist. It simply lay there, as if it had given up on the world long before she arrived. She carried it home. Back in the house, she turned the heat up and laid the cub on a blanket near the fire. She dried it gently, careful not to touch the injured eye. She filled a bowl with water and left it nearby. The cub didn't move. Elena sat on the floor, watching it. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. She wasn't a vet. She wasn't anyone important. She had no money for specialists, no knowledge about wild animals. And yet, here it was, a creature that had no one else. And here she was, a woman who had no one either. She stayed there for hours. At some point, the cub stirred. It let out a low, soft sound, not a growl, not a cry. Something in between. She moved closer. It didn't back away. She placed her hand near its head, not touching, just letting it feel her warmth. Slowly, the cub shifted. It pressed its body closer to the edge of the blanket, toward her hand. That night, she didn't sleep in her bed. She stayed next to the cub, wrapped in another blanket, her back against the wall, eyes half closed, but always listening. The rain didn't stop, but something had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. The storm didn't let up that night. It pounded the roof and filled the gutters until water spilled over the sides. Inside the stone house, the fire crackled low, and the tiger cub lay curled in a pile of towels. Elena sat close, legs crossed, watching its chest rise and fall. She hadn't even changed out of her wet clothes. She was afraid that if she left, even for a moment, the cub might not be breathing when she returned. Every few minutes, she leaned closer to check. Still alive. Its breathing was shallow but steady. Its small body shivered from time to time. The left side of its face was bruised, and one front paw looked swollen. She didn't want to touch it too much, afraid she'd make things worse. But she had cleaned the mud from its fur and wrapped it in one of her blankets. That was all she could do for now. By 2 a.m., she couldn't keep her eyes open anymore. She lay down beside the cub, not touching, just near, close enough that it might feel her presence. The floor was hard, and the air still smelled of wet fur, but her body was too tired to care. She woke before dawn. The fire was out. The room was cold, but the cub was still there. It had shifted during the night, just a little. Its body now rested closer to her arm. When she reached out to check its breath, the cub opened one eye and let out a quiet, hoarse sound. Not a growl, not fear, something softer. She smiled without meaning to. You made it. She spent the next few hours making the room warmer, reheating water, cleaning up. She fed it soft food, a little milk with crushed meat. She didn't know if tiger cubs could eat that, but it was what she had. To her surprise, it drank. The swelling on its paw hadn't gone down, and its movements were slow and stiff, but it seemed more awake, alert. Elena tried calling a vet in town. No answer. It was too early. She tried again later, then again at noon. Nothing. The town was small. There were maybe 2 vets total, and neither of them picked up. Elena stared at her phone for a while, then put it down. She didn't know what she expected. Even if someone answered, what would she say? Hi, I found a tiger cub in the woods behind my house. No one would believe her. And if they did, what then? Authorities? Papers? Photos? People asking questions? She looked at the cub again. It was sleeping now, curled tighter under the blanket. It looked peaceful, fragile. She didn't want anyone to take it away. By evening, the rain had slowed to a mist. Elena cleaned the cub's face again with a damp cloth. It didn't resist. When she touched the fur under its jaw, it leaned into her hand. Just a little. She laughed. It was quiet but real. She hadn't laughed in months. That night, she set up a spot for the cub beside the heater. More blankets. A small pillow. She moved her own mattress closer to it. They slept in the same room again. Just before drifting off, Elena whispered to the dark, "You're safe now." She didn't know if the cub understood, but it stayed. By the 3rd morning, the cub could stand. Not for long, a few seconds at most, but it stood. Elena had been in the kitchen when she heard the soft thud, like a small bag of flour, drop gently on the floor. She came rushing back and saw the cub, shaky on all 4 legs, swaying but upright. It looked at her, confused, then sat back down with a small, tired sound. She knelt beside it. "That's it," she whispered. "You're getting stronger." The cub blinked slowly. It was still groggy, still unsure of the world, but something in its posture had changed. There was tension in its muscles now. Intention. Elena gently rubbed its side, careful to avoid the paw. Its breathing was steady. She had no name for it yet. It felt strange to name something wild. This wasn't a pet. This was something rare, something impossible. And for now, it was in her care. That afternoon, when the rain finally stopped, she opened the back door to air out the house. The light outside was weak gray, filtered through clouds. The grass was wet and shining. The cub sniffed the air. It didn't try to move at first, just raised its head and watched the door, ears twitching at the distant sounds of birds and water dripping from the trees. Then it stood again, wobbled once, and began to limp forward. Elena didn't stop it. She followed it slowly, step by step, as it made its way to the open door. When it reached the threshold, it paused, its head tilted, eyes scanning the yard. For a second, it looked afraid. Then it stepped out. The ground was soft under its paws. It moved carefully, placing each foot like it was touching something holy. It sniffed a stone, a wet patch of grass, a fallen leaf. Its tail flicked. Elena stood behind it, silent. They stayed like that for maybe 10 minutes. The cub moving in slow, cautious circles. Elena standing watch, ready to run forward if it collapsed. But it didn't. Eventually, it returned on its own, slow, tired, but steady. She dried its paws and helped it back to the blanket. That night, it slept deeply. No shivers, no whimpers, just deep, slow breaths. The next day, it stood up again without falling. On the 5th day, it walked across the room to its water bowl on its own. And on the 6th, when she opened the door again, it didn't wait for her. It went out into the yard, limping a little, tail up, nose to the wind. Something in Elena shifted when she saw that. Not just pride, though there was that too. Something else. She realized, quietly, that she had started looking forward to its small victories, waiting for them, needing them. It had become part of her rhythm, not something she was helping or rescuing, but something alive beside her. Not a pet, not even a guest, just presence. The house didn't feel as empty now. Elena knew this couldn't last forever. She wasn't stupid. She didn't know where the cub came from, but she knew what it was and what it would become. In a few months, it would be bigger, stronger, faster. Too much for a house like this. Too much for one person. But she didn't think about that yet. For now, it needed her. And she needed it. Each day, she cooked a little more food, watched it stretch its limbs wider, heard its voice get louder. Each night, she lay beside it, the heat from its body warming more than just the blankets. And each morning, when it stepped outside, she stepped with it. It had been 2 weeks. The cub no longer needed help walking. The limp remained, but it moved confidently now, with purpose. Elena had cleared a section of the small field behind her house, pulling weeds and stones, so it had space to explore without injury. She'd stopped sleeping in her bed. She preferred the floor now, close to the cub. Her back ached, but it felt wrong to leave it alone, even with the worst behind them. By day, they followed a quiet routine. Early morning, she'd heat water and prepare food. Soft cooked meat for the cub, black coffee for herself. She'd watch it eat, check its wounds, and then open the back door. It would go outside and sniff around for hours. Sometimes it'd play with sticks. Sometimes it just lay in the sun. Elena always kept a cautious eye. It was stronger, yes, but it was still young. And it was still a tiger. That part never left her mind. One morning, just as she stepped outside to join it, she heard a sound from the trees. Not loud, but sharp enough to make her stop. The cub froze too. It lifted its head and let out a short, guttural growl. Elena narrowed her eyes, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. But the feeling was there, a shift in the air, like being watched. The cub took a few steps forward, muscles tensing. "No," Elena whispered, stepping beside it. She placed a hand on its back, not to control it, but to ground herself. The cub didn't growl again. Instead, it sniffed once more, then sat down in the wet grass, tail flicking. Whatever it had sensed it had passed. But the unease lingered. That afternoon, she drove into town. It was the first time she'd left the cub alone. She hesitated at the door 3 times before finally locking it. She left enough food and water, double-checked that the windows were shut, and whispered quietly before leaving, "I'll be back." She drove fast. Town was 30 minutes away. It felt like 3 hours. She bought supplies, more meat, gauze, antiseptic. She also picked up something she hadn't considered before. A small tracking collar. It was meant for dogs, not tigers, but it was all she could find. It felt like a betrayal, but she knew she needed it. If the cub wandered too far, she'd never find it in the woods. At the checkout, the woman gave her a strange look. "You getting a new pup?" Elena smiled tightly. Something like that. When she returned, The house was quiet. Her stomach tightened as she pushed open the door. But then she heard it, a low sound from the other room. She ran in, heart pounding. The cub was fine. Sleeping, belly up, paws twitching as if chasing something in a dream. Elena let out a long breath and dropped the bags on the floor. That night, she cooked too much food and fed it by hand again, even though it could eat on its own. She needed to feel the connection again, the reassurance. She clipped a small collar around its neck while it slept. It didn't notice. 3 days passed. On the 4th, the cub ran for the first time. Not for long, but enough to make Elena gasp. It had been chasing a butterfly. Its front legs landed too hard and it stumbled, but it bounced up again, bounding across the field with an awkward, beautiful joy. She laughed, for real this time. Loud, clear. She hadn't laughed like that in years. And then, on the 6th day, something changed. She was in the kitchen when she heard the cub's roar. It wasn't a cry or a growl. It was deeper, sharper. She ran to the door and saw it at the edge of the trees, fur on end, body low. It was facing something in the woods, tail whipping side to side. Elena's breath caught. There was movement in the shadows. Not human. Something bigger than a fox, smaller than a bear. And it was watching them. The cub growled again. Elena stepped closer, slowly. "Come here," she whispered, trying to keep her voice calm. The cub didn't move. It was guarding her. For a minute that stretched far too long, nothing happened. Then the thing in the woods turned and vanished into the brush. The cub stayed still for another 20 seconds, then slowly backed away and returned to her side. It didn't look at her. It was still on edge, but when she knelt and touched its face, it let out a low, familiar chuff. "You protected me," she said softly. She felt something hot rise in her chest. Not fear, not relief. Something heavier. Love. The night after the forest incident, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay beside the cub, watching its chest rise and fall, her thoughts a storm behind her eyes. The creature in the woods, it hadn't just wandered by. It had watched, stalked, and the way the cub had reacted, protective, but unsure, worried her more than the encounter itself. She knew that out here, isolated and alone, anything could happen, and no one would know. At sunrise, she walked to the field with the cub trailing close behind. It didn't run this time. It stuck near her, scanning the trees, occasionally letting out a low, barely audible sound. A new behavior. It had become cautious, aware, maybe even afraid, and that meant trouble. Later that day, while preparing food in the kitchen, she heard an engine. Her hands froze. No one ever came this far. The path leading to her cottage was more of a dirt suggestion than a road, and anyone who didn't know the area would get lost before finding her. She moved to the window. A pickup truck, faded green, the kind that belonged to someone who knew how to fix it themselves, crawled up the muddy trail. It parked in front of the house. Her heart dropped. The cub was outside. She rushed to the back door and called it, trying not to sound panicked. "Come here." Now. It was already halfway back, ears perked, clearly sensing the change. She opened the door and it slipped inside. She closed it gently and locked it. 3 seconds later, a knock. Sharp. 3 times. She didn't move. Another knock. This time a voice. "Sorry to bother you, Senora. My name's Raphael. I don't mean any harm." Spanish. Local accent. Familiar enough. She opened the door a crack. The man was around 50, lean, sun-browned skin, wearing a work jacket and boots caked in mud. His eyes were kind, but sharp, watchful. "What do you want?" Elena asked. "I work for the reserve. There have been reports of something strange nearby. Large animal sightings." She felt her breath catch. "And thought I'd check in. This house is the closest thing to the reports." She looked at him silently. He glanced at her muddy boots, the scratches on her forearms, the odd tension in her eyes. "You seen anything?" he asked. "No," she lied. He nodded slowly. Looked past her shoulder into the house, not intrusively, but with curiosity. "You live out here alone?" She nodded. He waited. Then casually, "If you do see anything, let us know. The forest isn't always safe." "I know." Raphael gave her a long look. The kind people give when they already know the answer, but are giving you a chance to lie again. He didn't push. Instead, he tipped his cap and turned. "Take care." She watched him leave, the truck vanishing back into the woods. Only then did she exhale. That evening, she sat on the floor beside the cub, feeding it piece by piece. It was calmer now, but it kept glancing toward the windows. It remembered the truck, the man, the scent of someone unfamiliar. She stroked its back. "I think we're running out of time." The cub didn't react, just licked her fingers. She leaned her head back against the wall, thinking, if the reserve knew there was a predator nearby, they'd return. Maybe with drones, maybe with traps. She'd kept the cub a secret for weeks, but she knew she couldn't forever. Still not yet. The next morning, Elena woke early. Too early. There had been a sound, a metallic echo. She slipped outside barefoot into the morning mist. And there it was, a fresh footprint in the mud. Human. Booted. Not hers. Her heart pounded. Someone had been close. Watching. Maybe even trying to get in. The cub padded up beside her, silent as a shadow. She looked at it, at the soft strength in its growing limbs, the fire in its golden eyes. And a thought hit her like a stone. They weren't safe here anymore. Not because of the forest, but because of people. She spent the rest of the day packing. Not everything, just what mattered. A small bag of clothes, a box of documents, emergency food, and a map. She hadn't needed it in years, but now she opened it, tracing roads, rivers, the paths she used to explore as a child. There was a place, remote, further than anyone would care to search. She remembered an old house, nearly ruined, near a river bend. She circled it. That night, as the cub slept by the fire, she sat beside it, hand on its chest. "We're leaving tomorrow." She didn't know what came next, but she knew they had to go. Together. Elena didn't sleep that night. She kept her eyes on the shadows cast by the dying fire, her ears tuned to the soft creaks of the old house and the occasional breath of the cub curled up beside her. The decision to leave had felt urgent, necessary. But now that the moment was near, anxiety gripped her. She whispered to herself, as if saying it aloud made it more real. "We'll be gone before sunrise." The cub stirred but didn't wake. It had grown fast, stronger, heavier. It barely fit in her arms anymore, and carrying it like she did in the beginning was out of the question. It followed her easily now, understood her voice, trusted her. But she didn't know how it would respond to what came next. Because this wasn't just a walk to the forest's edge. This would be a journey. A true one. And dangerous. At first light, she opened the back door and stood there, just breathing. Mist blanketed the field, giving the world a soft gray silence. A few birds chirped, but otherwise, it felt like everything, trees, soil, even time, was holding its breath. The cub walked out behind her and stood still. It sniffed the air once, then looked up at her. She knelt beside it, pulling the small bag onto her back and tightening the straps. "You ready?" It didn't answer, of course, but it didn't hesitate either. They left on foot, cutting through a trail behind her house that hadn't been walked in years. Overgrown bushes scratched her arms and legs, and tree branches reached like fingers. The cub followed close, silent, low to the ground. Every noise, a cracking twig, a bird's sudden flight, made both of them freeze. After the first hour, She checked the GPS device clipped to the cub's collar. Still working. Good. She glanced behind, half expecting to see Raphael's truck bouncing up the path. Nothing. But her sense of urgency only grew. By noon, they'd made it deeper than she expected. The forest here was thicker, older. The sun barely reached the ground, filtered by layers of green. She stopped at a stream to refill her bottle and let the cub drink. It walked into the water without hesitation, splashing gently, biting at the current like it was a game. Elena smiled. Despite everything, it still had joy. But that moment didn't last long. The cub suddenly stopped. Its ears perked. Its nose twitched. Then it turned sharply and growled. Elena froze. She followed its gaze. Nothing there. But she trusted its instincts more than her eyes. Something was out there. She slowly reached into her bag and pulled out the flare she'd packed, just in case. Not a weapon. Just light. A message if needed. She didn't use it yet. She just kept moving. An hour later, it happened. They were crossing a narrow slope when the cub misstepped. Its paw caught in a hidden crevice beneath the underbrush. It yelped, a loud, raw cry that echoed through the trees. Elena dropped her bag and rushed to its side. Its paw was twisted at an odd angle. No, 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 she muttered, trying to calm both of them. The cub didn't lash out. It whimpered and looked at her, breathing fast. She examined the paw, not broken, but definitely sprained. Maybe worse. They couldn't keep moving like this. She helped it sit, supporting its weight. It leaned on her, trusting her completely. And that trust broke something open in her chest. She hadn't realized how much it meant until now. I'm not going to leave you. She stayed there for almost an hour, cooling the injury with wet cloth, and whispering soft words, trying not to cry. They wouldn't make it to the abandoned house today. Maybe not even tomorrow. She found a small clearing nearby and started building a temporary shelter. Branches, tarps, rope. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep them dry if the weather turned. As night approached, she built a small fire and cooked what she could. A tin of beans and a piece of salted meat she'd packed. The cub didn't eat much. It rested its head on her lap and closed its eyes. Elena didn't sleep. She sat there in the dark, stroking its fur, scanning the trees for movement, listening. At some point in the night, the cub stirred and whimpered softly in its sleep. A dream? A memory? She remembered the first day she found it, broken, bleeding, terrified. Back then, it couldn't even walk. Now it stood between her and the wild. Her protector, her child, her friend. She tightened her grip on the GPS and flare. I'm going to get you through this, she whispered, even if I have to carry you the rest of the way. And she meant it. By morning, Elena's back ached from sitting upright all night, and the forest air had turned colder. The cub was still asleep, its head resting on her thigh, the injured paw tucked beneath its body. She gently moved, trying not to wake it, but the cub stirred as soon as the warmth of her leg left its face. It lifted its head, blinked at her, and let out a quiet sound, not quite a whimper, more like a groggy sigh. She leaned down and kissed the top of its head. We need to get moving. But how? The paw was still swollen. She couldn't risk making it worse by forcing the cub to walk. She needed another way. Her eyes scanned the forest until they landed on the thick branch she'd used as a walking stick the day before. An idea formed. A sled. Not a real one, of course. She didn't have the tools or time, but maybe something strong enough to drag across the forest floor. She pulled out her knife and started cutting. It took hours. She tied 2 long branches parallel with rope, reinforced the base with fallen bark, and cushioned it with a blanket. It looked like something a child might build out of boredom, but when she motioned for the cub to climb onto it, it did so without protest. That was what scared her most. It wasn't complaining anymore. It was too tired. That meant she had to move fast. She looped a rope over her shoulders like a harness and started walking. The weight wasn't unbearable, but the terrain made it feel like dragging a full-grown bear. The ground rose and fell in unpredictable slopes, and underbrush caught on the sled every few meters. She sweated through her shirt in minutes, but she didn't stop. Not once. Not when a thorn tore through her jeans. Not when the cub whimpered from a sudden bump. She just kept going. Around midday, the sky darkened. Not night, a storm. Of course. She'd seen the signs earlier, but had hoped they'd outrun it. Now, thick clouds rolled in fast, swallowing the sun. Thunder cracked in the distance like warning shots. She searched frantically for shelter. Nothing permanent. No cave. No cabin. But about 100 meters downhill, she saw a half-collapsed hunting blind. A raised wooden platform, likely abandoned for years. It was tilted, its ladder rotted and hanging, but the roof was mostly intact. It would have to do. She pulled the sled toward it, fighting the incline, her legs burning. Rain began to fall, then pour. By the time she reached the structure, she and the cub were soaked through. She pushed the sled beneath the angled roof and used a tarp to shield the cub as best she could. Then she climbed up the frame and tore off 2 loose planks to create a kind of wall behind them. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep them from freezing. Hours passed. She huddled with the cub, her body pressed against its side. It didn't complain about the closeness. It welcomed it, leaning into her, its breath shallow but steady. Lightning flashed, then thunder, then silence. In the quiet, she thought about her parents. They'd never understood her choice to live alone in the wild. Said it was reckless. Said she was running from something. Maybe she had been. But now, she wasn't running. She was carrying something. Someone. This creature she hadn't asked for had changed everything. As night fell, the storm moved east, and a sliver of moonlight pierced through the trees. She unwrapped the cub's paw and examined it again. Less swelling. No new bruising. She sighed in relief. Maybe, just maybe, it was healing. The cub lifted its head and looked at her, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She met its gaze, and in that moment, she felt something deeper than trust. It was as if the cub understood what she had done, what she was doing, and that she wouldn't stop, no matter what came next. The next morning, they continued. The sled dragged easier after the rain, the mud acting as a glide. Elena's arms were sore, blistered in places, but she didn't stop. Not when her knees buckled, not when her breath came in gasps. Around noon, she saw it. The house, or what remained of it, half buried in vines and moss. The stone frame was still intact. The roof had holes, and the door was hanging off one hinge, but it was shelter. Secluded. Forgotten. Perfect. She let out a shaky laugh. Not joy, not relief, but something rawer. She pulled the sled to the entrance and gently coaxed the cub off. It stood barely, but it stood. Together, they walked through the doorway, and for the first time in days, Elena whispered, "We made it." Inside, she lit a fire in the cracked hearth. The smoke curled up into the sky through a gap in the ceiling. The cub curled up beside her, paw tucked beneath it, eyes already fluttering closed. She laid her head against the wall and finally let the tears come, not from fear, but from the weight of love and the cost of protecting it. Days passed inside the stone house. Time moved differently there, wrapped in the rhythm of healing and silence. Elena lost track of hours, only guided by the sunbeams that crept through the holes in the roof, and the cub's slow, steady recovery. She tended to the paw constantly, rinsing, wrapping, whispering small reassurances. It still limped, but it could walk again. That was hope. She didn't venture far. Just outside to gather wood, fill the bottles from a nearby stream, sometimes find a berry bush or a cluster of wild mushrooms. The cub, still too sore to wander, waited by the doorway, ears perked until she returned. It didn't like being alone. Neither did she. One morning, the cub barked. A sound sharper than usual, alert. Elena dropped her cup and rushed to the doorway. Silence. She crouched, scanning the tree-line. Then movement. But it wasn't a person. Just a stag, proud and tall, stepping through the green haze. The cub watched silently. Its tail flicked once, then settled. Elena exhaled, her hand still tight around the flare in her pocket. The cub turned to her with an almost knowing glance. "Yeah," she muttered. "I'm jumpy too." That night, as she sat with the cub nestled against her, Elena took out the old notebook from her bag. It was stained and bent, used mostly for lists, food, gear, small reminders. But now, she turned to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "If I don't make it." The words stared back at her. She didn't want to write them, but something inside her said she had to. She wrote down the cub's age, the location of the house, everything it liked and feared, anything that might help someone else take care of him if she wasn't there. It felt like admitting weakness, but it was love. Love made her cautious. Love made her prepared. The next day, she was woken by the sound of the cub growling. Low, deep, not playful. She sat up quickly. Outside, footsteps. Heavy. Then a voice. Too close. "Elena, are you in there?" She froze. It was Raphael. She hadn't heard his truck, but somehow he'd found them. Maybe the GPS collar. Maybe word had spread. The cub backed into the corner, its fur standing up. Not afraid, protective. Elena moved between it and the door. "Elena, please," Raphael called again. "You've had your time. But this isn't safe. You know that." She didn't answer. He knocked softly. Too softly. She knew him too well. His kindness could be a trap. "Elena." He tried again. "You can't keep it. It's not a cat. It's a wild predator." She opened the door a crack. "He's not dangerous." Raphael looked at her. Older than before, more tired. His eyes flicked behind her. "Elena, it's already big. In a few months, it'll be unstoppable." She didn't blink. "I've seen worse from humans." He sighed. "Then at least let me help. Give me the GPS. Let me tell them you lost him." She hesitated. Raphael wasn't the worst of them, but even his help came with conditions. She shut the door. "I'm not ready." He waited a moment before walking away. She watched from the window as he disappeared into the trees. He hadn't fought. That scared her more. That night, the cub curled up with his head in her lap again. She stroked behind his ear, feeling the slow, even rhythm of his breath. "You're getting stronger," she whispered, "but I need to be smarter." She pulled the GPS collar off gently, then walked outside, found a squirrel trail, and tossed it into the brush. Let them follow it. She wasn't ready to give him up. Not yet. The next few days were spent preparing again. She restocked what she could from a forgotten hunting cache near the ridge, stitched a new harness from cut tarp and rope. She knew this house wouldn't protect them forever. They'd need to move again. But not yet. The cub still needed rest. So did she. One evening, as the forest was painted orange by the sunset, she sat with her back to the wall and watched the cub limp outside. He sniffed the air, then looked back at her, waiting, inviting her. She stood. They walked side by side into the trees. Not to escape, just to be. Together. No fear. No chase. No leash. Just two souls in borrowed time. In the days that followed Raphael's visit, a new tension settled in Elena's chest. It wasn't fear in the usual sense. Not fear of the forest or the cub's wildness. No, this was something quieter, more insidious. The fear of being watched. Hunted. Chosen for a battle she didn't agree to fight. Each night, she dreamed of boots in the leaves, of bright vests and metal cages. The cub, cornered. Herself, restrained. Her voice screaming into nothing. She woke with a jolt, again and again. The forest, once her sanctuary, now felt like a question mark, and she was running out of answers. The cub, meanwhile, was changing. His paw had nearly healed, the limp now just a habit rather than necessity. His gait was stronger, his reflexes quicker. The childlike awkwardness was fading, slowly replaced by a predator's grace. Elena saw it in the way he moved through the underbrush, silent, fluid, alert. But what unsettled her most was his restraint. He didn't chase the squirrels or pounce at birds. He watched, thought, waited. She knew that wasn't normal. He was learning her and copying. They were a strange mirror now. Two creatures born in different worlds, converging in one. One afternoon, as she foraged a short distance from the house, she heard a soft snap behind her. She froze, then turned. The cub. But this time he wasn't alone. Standing near him, maybe 10 paces off, was another animal. A fox. Thin, young. Its coat patchy from spring molt. The cub stood still. So did the fox. Elena's heart raced. If the cub lunged, it would end in seconds. But he didn't. He simply looked. The fox tilted its head, then darted away into the trees. The cub sat. Just sat. Elena's hands trembled. She approached him slowly and knelt beside him. You could have killed it. The cub blinked. Did he understand? She wasn't sure, but she whispered anyway. Thank you. That night, she started mapping again. Not just routes, but safe zones. Caves, old sheds, forgotten trails through the valleys. Raphael hadn't returned, but that didn't mean he wouldn't, or that others wouldn't come in his place. She considered going north, toward the ridges. Fewer people, rougher paths. She would lose signal, maybe forever. A small price. But then, what kind of life would that be? Always hiding, always running. For her? Yes. But for the cub? Was that kindness? Or was it fear wearing a friendly face? By morning, the decision had not come. Instead, rain. And with it, sound. Not thunder. Engines. Distant but clear. Elena bolted upright, heart thudding in her throat. She moved quickly, grabbing her pack and motioning to the cub. He stood immediately, alert, ready. She peeked through a gap in the stone wall. 3 figures, bright jackets, radios, one with a net, another with a dart rifle. They weren't shouting, not yet, but they were organized, trained. Elena didn't think. She acted, slinging her pack across her back. She rushed to the rear exit, barely a gap in the stone, but enough to squeeze through. The cub followed without hesitation. They didn't run. Not yet. She led him east, into the wet brush, across slick roots, and up toward the high ridge she had once considered but never reached. Behind them, voices now. Shouts. The chase wasn't fast, but it was relentless. Every time they stopped to breathe, the voices grew closer. The cub, even wounded, moved with uncanny speed. But Elena, her legs burned, lungs screamed. Every root felt like a trap. At one point, she slipped, falling hard onto a slope of wet moss. The cub skidded to her side, sniffing her face. I'm fine, she gasped. But her ankle pulsed with fire. No time. She pulled herself up and limped forward. As they reached the crest of the ridge, the forest opened slightly. A clearing, wide and wet, but offering a view of the vast valley below. No roads, no towns, just green, untouched. Sanctuary, but only if they could make it. Behind them a shout, louder now. Too close. Then a hiss. A dart sliced through the air and struck the tree beside Elena's head. The cub snarled, his body twisted, ready to leap. No, her voice echoed louder than the gunshot. The cub stopped, turned, looked at her, and in that instant, the hunters crested the rise. Time froze. Elena stepped in front of the cub. Hands up. Please, she screamed. He's not hurting anyone. The man with the dart gun raised his weapon. I said stop. Another dart loaded. Her heart thudded like war drums. Then a voice from below. Stand down. Everyone turned. A fourth figure. Older. Gray-bearded. Holding up a badge. Stand. Down. Elena didn't breathe again for a full minute. The man approached, slowly. His eyes studied her, then the cub, then back to her. You're the woman they warned me about, he said, not unkindly. She didn't answer. He looked at the cub. He's bonded to you. She nodded. He sighed. Long, deep. I can't protect you forever, he said, but I can give you time. He turned to the others. Report a false lead. Then walk away. The others hesitated, but they obeyed. And slowly, they disappeared back into the trees. Elena collapsed to her knees, arms around the cub, breath shaking. The man knelt beside her. You'll have to vanish, he said. I already did, she whispered. No, he said. Not yet, but now you will. He stood, gave one final look to the cub, then was gone. Elena looked down into the valley. Beyond the ridge, a new chapter waited. Untouched, unfound, unwritten. She turned to the cub. Ready. He didn't move, just placed his paw on hers. And together, they walked into the mist. The mist didn't lift for 3 days. Elena and the cub wandered through the dense veil like phantoms, soaked, silent, half-seeing. The world felt suspended, as if time held its breath with them. She didn't know where exactly they were heading, only that it had to be forward, away, deeper. The cub never questioned her. Not with sound, not with movement. He simply stayed close, walking when she walked, pausing when she needed to catch her breath. There was no trail, no footprints to follow, just instinct and an unspoken understanding that the past had ended and the future hadn't yet begun. On the 4th day, the sun finally cracked through, a golden blade cutting the gray, and beneath it green, an untouched valley, so vast and wild that even the trees seemed to hold their own secrets. Streams shimmered through the land like veins. Mountains rose in the distance like quiet gods, and at the center of it all, a cluster of ancient ruins, half swallowed by ivy and time. Sanctuary. Elena almost wept. They made a shelter beneath the collapsed roof of what might once have been a chapel. She cleared stone with numb fingers, laid moss in the corners, started a small fire with dry needles. The cub lay beside her as if he'd always belonged there, as if he too was a ruin reborn. In the days that followed, a rhythm returned, not like the life she had known in the city, but something rawer, closer to the bone. She learned where the water flowed cleanest, where the berries grew sweetest. The cub scouted now, moving ahead in the morning, returning at dusk. Once he brought back the leg of a deer, not as a trophy, but as a gift. She didn't eat meat, but she accepted it. She didn't want to break the trust. Weeks passed, and Elena began writing again. Not notes this time, but entries. A journal she carved out in charcoal and bark, eventually in faded ink from the last of her pens. She recorded everything, the cub's habits, the landscape, the changing sky. She wrote not for others, but for him. If anything ever happened to her, she wanted him to have memory, the story of what they'd shared, the story of being found. One night, a storm rolled in fast, wind tearing through trees like teeth. The old stones groaned. The fire snapped in protest. Elena woke to the cub growling. Lo! Warning. She sat up, eyes scanning the dark. Then she heard it too. Voices. Shouting. Lights. Flashlights. Up here. They've found tracks. Panic lanced through her chest. She grabbed her pack, Pre-packed, always, and bolted for the edge of the clearing. The cub followed instantly. They ran through rain and mud, through roots and branches slapping her face. Shots rang out behind them. She didn't look back. They reached a ravine, steep and narrow. She hesitated. Too wide, too wet. But behind them, dogs. And men. She turned to the cub. You have to jump. He stared, terrified. Elle, her voice cracked. You have to. She stepped back and ran. She leapt, landed hard on the other side, falling to her knees. She spun, breath caught in her throat. The cub stood trembling, then backed up, and jumped. For a moment, he was in the air. Too slow, too heavy, too wide. But he made it. Barely. They collapsed into each other. Alive. Just barely. They kept moving for hours, until dawn began to bleed through the treetops. Only then did they stop. Only then did she cry. Not because she was scared, but because she knew this would never end. They would never stop looking. Not until one of them fell. That morning, she made a choice. They reached a cliffside, with a narrow path winding along its edge. Below, mist and endless trees. And beyond, nothing. She took off the cub's collar and threw it over the edge, then pulled out her notebook. She tore out the last page and wrote only one thing. We are not lost. We are choosing where we go. She left a note beneath a stone. A message. A warning. A blessing. Years passed, and stories began to surface. Of a great cat seen moving through the high forests. Not just once, but again and again. Too sleek to be wild, too silent to be hunted. A legend formed. Of a woman and her tiger. A ghost of the woods. A protector. No one ever caught them. No traps worked. No cameras triggered. Only blurred shapes. And sometimes a paw print. Too large to be real. But it was. Elena had gone beyond names. Beyond fences. Beyond fear. She walked only where trees bent to greet her and rivers parted without question. And the cub? He walked beside her. Not a pet. Not a beast. A bond. Untamed. Unbreakable. Forever.